Welcome to Eat, Drink, Think. I'm Amy O'Neill Hauk. In this podcast from Edible Communities, a network of magazines published across North America, we celebrate all things local and sustainable in the food world. Today, we're speaking with Will Harris. Will is a fourth-generation cattleman who tends the same land that his great-grandfather settled in 1866. After taking over White Oak Pastures from his father, he continued the industrial farming methods his dad had instituted and that he had studied at the University of Georgia's School of Agriculture. In the mid-1990s, Will had an epiphany which led to a complete shift in methods and a return to stewarding the land and the animals in ways more aligned with how his grandfather and great-grandfather had done. As he and his family inadvertently pioneered a return to grass-fed, regenerative farming, his work had unintended consequences, like bringing life back to the small town near his farm and creating over 150 skilled jobs. Will chronicles the shift away from industrial agriculture in his book, A Bold Return to Giving a Damn, One Farm, 6 Generations, and the Future of Food, in which he also makes the case to eaters, fellow farmers, and would-be farmers to join him in a slow pendulum swing back to ecological balance for humans, the land, and what we eat. Will, welcome to Eat, Drink, Think.
Thank you for having me, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're glad you're here. One thing that you do beautifully in your book is paint a picture of your farm at various moments throughout your life. Can you give listeners a sense of what they would see today if they dropped by for a visit?
I would like to think that if you drove down U.S. Highway 27, you would know that you were on a different kind of a farm when you entered our farm and when you left it. We are in an area that is intensive corn, cotton, and peanut production, very intensive, a lot of ground preparation, a lot of chemical fertilizers, a lot of pesticides. And our farm looks very different. It's a thriving ecosystem, and I feel like I'm bragging when I say that, but I also feel like it's true.
Mm-hmm. So can you describe some of the animals and the things that are growing?
I can. We raise cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits, chickens, turkeys, geese, guineas, and ducks. And we have bees, we have for honey production, we have a vegetable garden, and it's 3,200 acres contiguous along Highway 27. And it's in warm season perennial grasses, and we overseed in the winter with cool season annual grasses, so it's almost always green. We have about 2 months of transition. We don't use any chemical fertilizers or pesticides on the land. We don't use any artificial antibiotics or hormone implants on the animals. And it just really makes a difference. I like to think it's teeming with life. Used to, when I was a very industrial cattleman, I went to my pastures every day, and I was literally looking for something to kill. I wanted a monoculture of only cattle and a monoculture of only Tifton 85 Bermuda grass. And if you were in my pasture and you weren't one of those two species, I knew how to kill you. I used pesticides. Homicide means kill people. Pesticide means kill pests. Insecticide, nematicide, herbicide, and I was in the killing business. And now I'm in the business of the living business. I want to keep everything in the ecosystem operating optimally.
And you mentioned in the book that there's an animal or a being that you don't necessarily list that is very important to what's growing on your farm, and that's the microbes.
Yeah, the infrastructure is plants, animals, and microbes, and they're all equally important in the ecosystem. They all have a role. Every species of plant or animal or microbe that is indigenous to that ecosystem has a role. We all know that bees pollinate plants. We see that. It's easy to see, you recognize. But I believe that every living creature that's indigenous to an ecosystem has a role in it. We may not have studied it enough to know what that role is. They're making some contribution. And it's disturbing to me that modern farming practices, as like I engaged in and my dad engaged in, it has driven so many species into extinction or near extinction. And those species had a role in the ecosystem. And when they are no longer present, that something changes, right? The ecosystem can change. It's resilient. But it's a shame that we make it change so much.
Mm-hmm. And your farm, as we said, has been around since 1866. So I think it's a mix of buildings that have been there for a long time and maybe some new things that you've put on the farm as you've transitioned to regenerative farming. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I
can. And in fact, White Oak Pastures, the 3,200 acres, is about 4 miles along the 4-lane road, Highway 27. And in Bluffton, Georgia, the little town I'm sitting in, is right in the middle of it. And Bluffton is full of history. Bluffton was actually formed in 1815. It's one of the oldest towns in the Creek Indian Treaty that's not on a navigable waterway. And there are a lot of old buildings in town. And, when I changed the way I farm from very industrial cattle production to what I do now, it was, in my mind, it was all about the land and the animals. I just wanted to do that differently. I was unhappy with the way I was managing that. And it happened fairly quickly. 10 or 15 years into it, the town became important to me. Bluffton had literally become a ghost town. It had always been a purely agrarian economy. It never had a railroad. It never had a factory or a mill or a plant. Purely a little agricultural town. So when it died, it died. I mean, and there was nothing here. And we've been very aggressively buying houses and stores and lots in Bluffton, and preserving this old town has become very important to me. And it's amazing. It is thriving again. It's not very big, but it's a beautiful little place. We're very proud of it.
In the book, you talk a lot about greenwashing and the challenges of certification and describing various kinds of farming. So to put us all on the same page, understanding what you're advocating for, can you give us your definition of regenerative farming?
Regenerative farming is operating the farm so that it restarts the cycles of nature. The cycles of nature are the carbon cycle, the mineral cycle, the microbial cycle, the grazing cycle, on and on, many, many, many cycles of nature. And when those cycles are operating optimally, it spins off an abundance. All that coal and oil and gas in the ground that we've been using for the last 100 years, that is the abundance of nature from the era of the dinosaur when the cycles of nature were operating optimally. I would love to see how that looked. But we have when we changed the way we farm and started intentionally breaking the cycles of nature, it ceased to spin off the abundance in the same way. Now we're enjoying an abundance, but the abundance is coming from using up the fossil fuels, using up the organic matter in the soil, using up the groundwater. We're depleting these assets that have been built up through the era.
You talk a lot about the idea of a generational practice with respect to your regenerative farming and the fact that you personally may not see the payout of what the farm or other regenerative farms could be, but you're thinking about generations beyond even the ones who are living now. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, that's one of the most disturbing, for me, disturbing aspects of what we do. We live in a world that's driven by the monthly report, the quarterly report, the annual report. That's how business is done. And when you are in agriculture the way we are, you're dealing with non-depreciating assets. There aren't many. Land, the herd, maybe mineral gems. There aren't many non-depreciating assets, but land is one, and then the herd is one. And time takes on a very different meaning. And when we have we do $30 million in volume a year. We got a controller. We drive her crazy. They're focused on this monthly report, quarterly report, annual report. And for us, it's a generational thing. We make investments in this farm that we know won't pay off by the month and the quarter of the year or the year. It's meant to be generational. I'm 70 years old, been here all my life. My daughters are in their 30s, their spouses in their 30s. They've got babies. This farm won't persist forever. It's lasted 160 years. And it's going to last another 30 or 40 years because we've got a generation committed to it. But the idea of managing a business to maximize the return in the very short run is not something that works for us.
I guess I'm wondering about models that might not center on individual or family or corporate ownership. Have you seen models of regenerative farming where the land itself is not necessarily owned by a single entity?
I don't know of those farms. I'm not saying they don't exist, but I don't know of them.
So jumping back to the idea of regenerative farming for a minute, one thing that you talk about in the book is how the grazing methods that you're using are an attempt to mimic the wildness that happened when large ruminants roamed North America. And can you talk about how that changed when that stopped happening, how that changed our wilderness and our land that became agricultural land?
Yeah, so when I was an industrial cattleman, my animals were very confined, very much in confinement. And when I made the change, I spent a lot of money to accommodate doing it differently. Today, we move cattle every day. This 3,200 acre farm is divided up into 150-something, 30-ish, 20-ish acre paddocks. And we move the animals every single day. And it's an effort to emulate herds of buffalo moving from Mexico to Canada. It's a very imperfect emulation. It's not nearly as good. It's the best I can do. And we do a lot of things to accommodate that. We have a cafeteria mineral feeder that allows them to eat the mineral they need when they need it. We do a lot of things to accommodate it. We literally move the herd every day. That's a very enjoyable thing. There's no driving the herd. It's a matter of opening the gate and get out of the way because they know where they're going to move next. It was a great change for me. I'd been educated that the confinement method was the most efficient, and it was quite a sweeping change, but it's beautiful, and I love it. And what it does for the land is incredible. We put these big herds of animals. There may be 2,000 head in a herd, 3 herds. Biggest one's almost 2,000 head. We'll put them on that little paddock, and the grass is grown up. It's just 2 feet deep, and they'll eat it off, bite it off. They'll manure. They urinate. They tromp it in with their hooves. And that it just stimulates that plant to grow again, and that plant becomes like a carbon pump. It's photosynthesizing and bringing in carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases and making that beautiful plant material that's fat and protein and carbohydrate for the animals. The animals bite it off, and if there's this much carbon on top of the ground, there's that much under the ground in the roots. When they bite it off, those roots slough off, but the carbon stays in the ground, and it just turns that plant into a carbon pump. The organic matter in my soil on this farm has gone from 0.5% organic matter to 5.5% organic matter. And to put that in perspective for you, 1% organic matter will absorb a 1-inch rainfall. A 1-inch rainfall is about 27,000 gallons per acre. So my land will absorb a 5.5-inch rainfall, whereas it used to only would absorb a 0.5-inch rainfall. It's beautiful, and you can see it. I mean, an untrained observer can see that looks different from the other farms around.
That makes me think of the idea that you discuss about resiliency and describing your farm as resilient. And as the climate is changing and storms are getting bigger, it sounds like that much organic matter in the soil is going to sort of be a bit of insurance against extreme weather.
It is. In fact, there's a scientific study that was done on this farm, very expensive, a big company paid for it, called an LCA, life cycle assessment, and it's on our website. And you can look at it, and it'll explain to you the advantages, what's been done here in building this carbon, and the ecological advantages that it offers this farm and others.
One of the descriptions of humane animal husbandry that you use in the book, and that stood out to me, is the idea of animals who are free to express their instinctive behaviors. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, those are key words that you said, express instinctive behavior. You know, when I was a very industrial cattleman, I thought my animal welfare was above reproach. You know, we never starved animals. We never beat animals. I thought we were doing well. If you had told me my animal welfare was not good, I would have objected to you making that statement. But what I was not doing is allowing the animal to express its instinctive behavior. You know, chickens are meant to scratch and peck. Cows are meant to roam and graze. Hogs are meant to root and wallow. And in the confinement model that I was using, those animals didn't get to do that. It would be like you taking if you have children, taking a 10 or 12-year-old child and putting them in a closet. And the closet was 72 degrees, and there was a mattress in there, and you left the light on. The child was very safe, but it didn't allow the child to express instinctive behavior. And that's what we were doing. And when we started doing it, it made a lot of difference.
Can you tell us about how it takes multiple species of animals on your farm to create the grass and the soil that you want?
Yeah, I think it's George Washington Carver that said, nature abhors a vacuum. And nature also abhors a monoculture. I don't think you can come up with a single monoculture that exists naturally on this planet. In any ecosystem, there's always plants and animals and microbes living in symbiotic relationships with each other. And when we decided to farm monocultures, we put hogs in the hog house, cows in the cow pen, feedlot, chickens in the chicken house, and intentionally separated the species. And we did that so that we could manage them better, but we lost a lot in trying to create that monoculture, which is absolutely against nature.
You spend a lot of time walking readers through your own process of deciding to go kind of cold turkey on industrial farming. In fact, you even describe giving up chemical fertilizers as a kind of process of withdrawal because you missed the quick high of watching grass grow over just a few days. And I was curious about the rest of the folks on the farm at the time you were having these epiphanies. Was it hard to get everybody on board? And how did you make the case?
Actually, no one that worked with me on the farm is still here. They couldn't make the transition. I was fortunate in that I was I'm an only child, and my dad was ill, so I was able to very autonomously manage what we did here. My employees didn't stay. They didn't all leave at one time, but they just didn't. They didn't like it. They didn't have the appreciation for what I was doing. We replaced them with others who do have the appreciation. And it's a learning experience for all of us. And, when I went into it as a university-educated, very industrial cattleman, and I had to figure it out. And I made a lot of mistakes in figuring it out. And we just had to work through that. But today we've got 170 employees. They're wonderful people. They're here because they want to be here. And I'm very grateful that I got them here.
And speaking of universities, one of the challenges that you mention in the adoption of regenerative farming practices across the country is the lack of agricultural schools teaching these practices. And I'm curious if that has changed much in the 25 or so years that you've evolved White Oak Pastures, and if any universities have gotten on board.
It certainly has not changed on a widespread basis. The fact is that these land-grant universities, which are most of our ag colleges, are very heavily dependent upon money from the industry, the pesticide companies, the feed companies, the tech companies fund research for those land-grant colleges. And they're just very slow to change. And, I've made the decision that, when my grandchildren are ready to go to school, I don't want to pay for them a land grant agricultural education. If they want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a school teacher, then that's different. But if it's agriculture, that's not the kind of agriculture that they should be studying to work here.
Can you talk about how your business went from depending mostly on your wholesale customers like grocers to selling directly to consumers, and why that happened?
Yes. When I moved from the industrial beef business to the grass-fed beef business, I was very, very, very lucky. The timing was not intentional on my part. It was pure good fortune. But we made the transition about the time that people were talking a lot about grass-fed beef, but nobody had much grass-fed beef. So we were able to sell our product. We were the first grass-fed beef sold by Whole Foods Market, Public Supermarket, Kroger, and then some others. And we had some really good years. They were glad to get it. We were glad to sell it to them. We made good margins, and it was a better than budget kind of a business there for a long time. In 2015, USDA changed the rule on product of the USA. Prior to that, for beef to be labeled product of the USA, the animal had to be born, raised, and slaughtered in the 50 states. They changed the rule so that if value was added in the 50 states, it was a product of the USA. And that opened the door for imported grass-fed beef from Uruguay, Australia, New Zealand, and 20-something other countries. And I didn't lose my position with those grocers, but they wouldn't pay me much for it. They would only pay me what they could import it for. And that was less than I had been accustomed to getting. And we had some hard years prior to the COVID. When COVID hit, the grocery stores didn't have beef anymore. And my daughter had started our online business, whiteoakpastures.com. And we weren't doing much with it. We were doing a couple $1 million volume and losing money on it. It was not a good deal, but it was still kind of like beta testing. When the COVID epidemic hit and the grocery stores didn't have beef anymore, it just set our business on fire, and we sold In fact, last year we sold more product online delivered by FedEx and UPS than we sold wholesale. So it really saved us.
With respect to the USDA and country of origin regulations, do you know if there is any effort to change that so that it's more transparent to the consumer or more protective of things that are actually produced in the United States?
There's been a lot of effort on our part and other farms like us to have that changed. And we have been assured that that will change on December the 31st of 2025. I really don't know if it will or not, but we have been assured that, and the change is not as sweeping as I wanted it to be, but it's a help. Beef that's slaughtered in other countries can't be marked product of the USA. It can have a USDA inspected stamp on it, but it can't say product of the USA. So that's a help. We wanted country of origin label, mandatory country of origin labeling. We wanted it to say product of Uruguay, probably product of Argentina, Australia, whatever. And I want to say this. I'm not saying that the beef that's produced in these other countries is bad beef. I'm not saying that. I don't know. I've not been to look. But it's not a product of the USA. I mean, in all honesty, it's not. And I really want it to say product of wherever it comes from. But it's a help if it just won't say product of the USA.
That kind of brings us to the consumer and the work that they have to do when making food buying decisions. And one of the things that you repeat throughout the book is that consumer demand is going to be a driver of any shift towards more regenerative practices. You speak eloquently about the true cost of cheap food. And so consumer choice, maybe in your view, is kind of part of giving a damn. But whenever the onus is placed on consumers to drive change in this food system that's been created to maximize profit for corporations, I can't help but think of folks who are just getting by or who don't have the time, money, or capacity to maybe meet their farmer or be choosy about what they can afford to buy. So I'm wondering, how do those without the means to pay for grass-fed regenerative meat fit into changing the system?
What you said is exactly right. The USDA is not going to change our food production system. Big food is not going to change our food production system. Big tech is not going to. I can give you a long, long list of people and entities that will not change the way the food is produced. If there's a significant change made, it will be because of consumers. And consumers are, the marketing that goes behind food is so skillful. It is so, I know what the truth is, and it makes me feel good about it, and I know better. So it's just very professionally done. Brilliant people make a lot of money marketing food in a way that the consumers feel good about buying it. And so it takes a lot of effort on the part of the consumer to find a producer that they can have confidence in and support. I told you that we sell $30 million worth of product, and we do, and we sell it in 48 states. And I don't want to sell product in 48 states. I want to sell product here. And I can't sell $30 million worth of product in Bluffton, Georgia, but I can in Atlanta and Jacksonville, Florida, and here in the South, in the deep South. And it disturbs me that I ship product to those 48 states, and I'm depriving some other farmer the opportunity to go to market. That disturbs me. I got to do it because I have built up infrastructure that I've got to put volume through to pay for, but I don't want to compete with those people. I want to sell my product locally. My family has made the decision that we are not trying to grow this business. We may have grown too much, and I can't undo it, can't unring that bell, but I cannot grow it any more. But I do need to sell that amount of stuff, and I want to sell it locally. And I want others. I want farmers in New England to sell in New England and the Pacific Northwest to sell in the Pacific Northwest and so on. And I want to sell in the Deep South.
Have you found ways to turn the company's communication attention towards those parts of the country where you wish more of your business was coming from?
No. It takes all of the marketing effort we can muster to sell the $30 million in 48 states. And I can't afford to say, well, nope, I'm only going to ship to in Georgia or Florida or Alabama. I can't afford to do that. And what's got to happen is more consumers have got to buy products like ours, not from me, but like ours, to allow more farmers to have the chance. It's going to be a painful evolution. It's not going to happen quickly and easily for the farmer or the consumer. It's going to take a concerted effort. It's very difficult for farmers to cease to produce industrially and start producing like we do. It's very economically painful, steep learning curve. These farmers that are producing food industrially are good people. They are not bad people. They are caught up in a generational evolution that went the wrong way. They're financially invested in it. They're emotionally invested in it. It's just very difficult. It was hard for us, and that was 25 years ago. It's even harder now.
I think that's one of the things that makes your voice unique, is that we often hear from journalists about big food, or we hear from academics, and hearing directly from you is, a voice that is new and important. And one of the things that you talk about in the book is the loss of rural life. And at one point, you're comparing it to the loss of wilderness. Can you tell us about that comparison?
I can. I was born in 1954, raised in the 50s and 60s, and I was a child of nature. We hunted and fished and played in the woods, and I really wanted to go to the wilderness. I wanted to go to the jungles of Africa, the Yukon, to the Amazon in South America. I wanted to go to that wilderness, and that's where I wanted to be. And of course, I wasn't able to do that. I followed the family tradition here, farming here, and it was fine. But it has occurred to me that the wilderness just about doesn't exist anymore. When I was a little, I'm 70 years old. I'm pretty old. But when I was a little boy, there was wilderness, and I'm an old man. And we have the way we have run the earth, produced our food, built our cities. I don't think the wilderness exists much anymore, except where it's been preserved. And I can see that same thing happening to rural. Even today, there's still a lot of rural communities, but the rural communities are not doing nearly as well as they used to. And in fact, in most places, they are decaying economically. This little town of Bluffton I mentioned earlier is a prime example of it. With the industrialization, commoditization, centralization of the food production system has impoverished rural America. And if the rural community is depending on agriculture, it's not doing very well economically. I can assure you of that. And I hate to see that happen. We've already done it to the wilderness. I hate to see us do it to rural.
In the book, you talk about how your resilient farming methods protected White Oak from the fragility that the industrial meat system felt during the pandemic. And I was wondering, that made me wonder a bit about the current bird flu crisis and how it might be affecting your farm.
I don't want to seem like I'm diminishing the epidemic, the pandemic that we had. People got sick, people died. I'm very sorry about that. But the fact is, White Oak Pastures never missed a lick. We slaughtered animals every single day. We have a store that we operated every single day, 7 days a week. We cooked food in our restaurant every single day, 7 days a week. People came in and ate. We had a lot of people here on the farm that got the disease, but nobody suffered much from it. Nobody. We had one hospitalization who was a person that had other health issues. It was just, compared to the rest of the country, it was a non-event. And I'm not saying I know why that is. I'm just telling you how it was. Now, you mentioned bird flu, and we're in that business, and I just hadn't been able to worry about it much. Something could happen. It could wipe me out, but similar to the pandemic, I just don't think it will. And I'll give you an example of what makes me think that. My guys that operate the poultry crew found some dead chicken, and they chose to take it to the University of Georgia Diagnostic Lab about 100 miles from here. And they did their testing on it, and the state veterinarian, that's a very highly placed person in Georgia, state veterinarian called me, said, I've got some bad news. The bird that your people brought in tested presumptive positive for avian influenza, high pathogenic avian influenza. And we got to do some more testing. It's going to take 24 hours. But if it's highly pathogenic avian influenza, we're going to have to depopulate your farm of poultry. And I had about 70,000 birds on the ground. And I called my insurance people, and it was not covered. So it was just going to be a loss. And I couldn't afford it. And I had a bad 24 hours. And when the state vet called me the next day, so I got some really good news. The bird is not highly pathogenic, and no further action is necessary. That's great. And he said, but one thing's odd. The bird had titers in its blood for the highly pathogenic pathogen. Did you inject those birds? Did you treat them? I said, no, we didn't. And he said, well, I don't know what it is. I said, let me ask you this. What if a duck flying over my farm defecated, and that feces fell on my pasture, and that chicken got in it, was infected, the chicken got in it and got a little ill, but was strong enough that it lived through the disease? Would that give it the blood titers? He said, yeah, that would do it. I said, well, what else would? He couldn't come up with anything. So I think that my flock has some level of immunity because of the healthy way we raise them.
And which is mostly out of doors, right?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Because they're out of doors, out there eating bugs and scratching in the cow manure, and they're just doing what chickens do.
So one of the bright spots you mentioned for farmers hoping to start or transition to regenerative practice are loans that are tied to soil health. I hadn't heard of this prospect before. Can you tell us a little bit about those and why they're important?
Well, I think they're very important. I have not qualified for any of those yet. We've talked to some people. But that's still something to aspire towards. Even appraisals, conventional appraisal. I bought a lot of farmland, and when I buy it, I have to finance it. And when I finance it, the bank sends an appraiser out to appraise the land. And I had an appraiser here one day, and he appraised a farm I wanted to buy. And I said, let me show you something else. So I took him to another farm that I already owned that was very similar size and improvements. But that land had 5.5% organic matter. And the land he appraised was 0.5%. And I explained to him the difference. And I said, would that impact how you appraise these properties? He said, no. And he said, that's a shame, isn't it? He said that. So, it's a financially in terms of collateral, it's financially non-productive to make the improvements. We want to make them because of production-wise, it's very much the right thing to do. But the lenders have not embraced that yet.
Late in the book, after making no bones about criticizing big tech, big ag, big food, as well as billionaires buying up land and the entrenched industrial agriculture system, you land on a philosophy for change that eschews tearing the whole thing down. You say, my bet is that if, as a society, we steadily help this replication of resilient farming practices happen, rather than overly focusing on abandoning the current system, we will create a playing field where resilient agriculture can start to take hold. I found this optimistic because it seems more achievable than making sudden huge changes to a system. Can you talk about your thoughts on incremental change and why that feels right?
This gets back to the conversation we had about land being a non-depreciating asset. And I think that one of the things that we've done wrong is, I know it is that so often farm families say, well, really the only asset we've got is the land. And we've got 7 children, so we're going to leave everybody 1/7 of the farm. And there may be only 1 or 2 of those children they are trying to make a living on that. So they've got to compete with non-farm entities to buy that land from the siblings, because the siblings want all they can get out of it. And then the farm won't operate anymore. Those kids can't operate on 1/7 of the farm. They've got to have the whole farm. And I think that's just, I think it's wrong. The old European way of passing estates down is the eldest son got the estate. And I think that's wrong for it to be the eldest son, but I think that leaving estates intact are the best way to give them a longer life. In my case, I've got 3 children, and I'm going to leave the farm to the 2 children that came back. I'm not mad at the other one. She's great. She's wonderful. But I'm not going to chop up this operating entity just to be fair in terms of distribution.
And as farmers around the country consider this switch towards more resilient agriculture, are there ways beyond going cold turkey that they can start to make changes?
Yes. It's too variable for me to say this is how you ought to do it. Certainly, I went cold turkey, and that was painful. I don't necessarily recommend that. It's the only way I've ever done it, and I don't know how I wouldn't know how to tell somebody how to do it. I think that I'll tell you this. My experience is that transition won't come much from established farmers like me. The transition will come from non-established farmers starting to farm. I expect that. We have a couple of things. We got a nonprofit, a 501c3 called CFAR, Center for Agricultural Resilience. And we train people who want to farm this way. And we do it with an internship program, and we do it with little schools that we have. And we actually get 20-something applications per quarter, and we only take 6. So we can be pretty selective. But the people who come here on our intern program and who come to our training sessions are seldom industrial farmers. Some, occasionally, but most of them are very much non-agricultural people that have developed the interest. And that is fascinating to me.
Is there anything new since the book came out that's happening at White Oak Pastures that you'd like to tell us about?
We had a very good year financially last year, and we're doing a lot of things this year. We're going to build a large photovoltaic array to power our processing plants. Our electricity bill is $26,000 or $7,000 a month, 12 months a year in the processing plants. We're going to put a solar array in to power it. We built a really big freezer. Our business is moving from grocery to direct to consumer. So that's frozen products. So we built a really, for us, big freezer. Not big industrially, but for us it's big. We're doing some conversion work. My red meat slaughter plant, we've outgrown it. And my poultry slaughter plant, I built it too big. So we're doing some work to change things so that I can process hogs, sheep, and goats in the poultry plant and still do poultry there, doing alternate days. So we got a lot going on, and really like it like that.
And visitors are welcome, right?
Yeah, we have a restaurant open 7 days a week. We got lodging. We've got they do tours. They do educational schools. And we enjoy having guests. Our customer facing store and restaurant and lodging is not profitable. It's very break evenish. But we have made the decision to stay in that business because it allows people to come to see us. We're very rural here. It's 50 miles to the nearest Holiday Inn. So if we're going to entertain visitors, we got to accommodate them. And so we made that investment.
Well, that's great. I hope that I'll be able to see it at some point. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. You're certainly invited. I enjoyed talking to you today.
I appreciate it. We've been speaking with farmer and author Will Harris. Thank you for joining us today at Eat, Drink, Think. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to pick up your local edible magazine. You can find show notes for today's episode at ediblecommunities.com.